Welcome to the PocketGamer.biz podcast. I'm your host, Peggy Anne Salz. Brian is out doing some amazing things, and he'll be back on another show. But in the meantime, well, I go out to all the events, listen to all the marketers, and I'm hearing them talk more and more about, we need to get more from less. Clearly, no questions. But what about getting more out of your older titles? Reigniting community engagement that you had. So you nailed it once. Why can't you nail it again? Or the other question, should you nail it again? Sometimes maybe it's best to let it stay just the way it is, dormant. Either way, we have the answers because I've got Mike Gallagher. He's founder of Untitled Advertising Lab. Mike, fantastic to have you finally. We do it because you've been talking about this at many events, most recently at GDC. So yes, you've heard it, and we want to dive into this. But first, everyone's more than a title, right? And everyone has more than an amazing company. And in your case, that's a creative and strategic engagement agency. We'll get into more about that because you're helping small and medium-sized game studios make the most of their marketing spend and also their older titles. But quick one. First of all, great to have you. And you've brought some stories with you, I think.
Yeah. No, we've been in business now for a year and a half, so we've got some good case studies. I think we're gonna tell you all about today, and obviously I've been in the business for quite a while. So yeah, super excited. Thank you for having me. I know this has been a long time coming. We've been trying to schedule this for a bit, so I'm super happy to be here.
I'm excited too because we've been chatting about it for a while, and now, yeah, I'm even happier because I didn't know you seemed to me to be almost like part of the furniture, and it's only been a year and a half. I've been hearing about you, seeing you everywhere. So you're on the road, man. You're on the road.
I'm trying it. I'm doing the world tour. I'm everybody's at Reboot this week, so I'm a little bit jealous that I'm at home in rainy Vancouver, but I can't complain.
Okay, so I want the T-shirt that has like on the back, right, the world tour. I think there's an Untitled Lab world tour. Anyway,
Yeah, there you go.
quick detour to yourself because everyone's more in the title, as I said, and interesting, you adopted a dog from the Air Buddies movie. So that's not your everyday thing. And then I had to ask myself, other than the fact that you're an animal lover, and I am too, what's the connection there? Because you're building trust in communities and you've got the loyalty of a good dog. Is there a connection there?
Oh, I wish I was that meta, but I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can make that connection for you. But that's so. The funny thing is, that's from an entirely different career. So before I even got into marketing and games and entertainment, I actually worked in the film and television industry for almost 7 years.
Okay.
I started out on the Air Buddies franchises, and yeah, it's I'm not going to talk bad about them, but there's a lot of puppies that come through because once they get a little bit too big, they're not as cute.
Oh, yeah.
So they go up for adoption. So I was lucky enough to snag one at the end of the show, and he was a rascal.
Oh, that sounds sweet. And it's true. That was maybe a bit meta, but it's still fun. I was like, I know there's got to be this great loyalty and engagement story here, but let's move on. We talked a little bit about your agency, but what I like about it is that you don't call it um, just an agency. You're calling it an engagement agency, and not just community agency, everything. What is that? Break that down because no one, everyone's a creative agency, right? Marketing agency, digital, whatever. Engagement agency, new one for me.
Yeah, so we call it an engagement agency, first of all, because we wanted to do things a little bit differently, and I think it kind of comes back to our core philosophy, right? So when we look at kind of like our through line services and kind of what we like to do when we look at a project, it's not just, well, we're going to run your Discord, or we're going to build your social media content, or we're going to do your PR. We want to look at that full player cycle all the way from, like a closed alpha. How are you going to find that initial cohort of like 100 players, all the way up to, well, we're going to sunset this title. How are we going to offboard these players into different titles, or are we just closing down the project because of unfortunate, market circumstances? And then what are all those touch points along the way, right? The philosophy that we kind of prescribe to is the wider you can make your engagement funnel, the more you can engage players at every step along the way. the better off your game is going to be, right? You're going to stay top of mind. There's going to be more awareness for your product. People are going to come back. They're going to want to engage with you, not just in the product, but also outside and then loop back in. And so our goal is to kind of close that push-pull relationship between the product, your communities, and every step along the way.
Very interesting concept, though, to keep it broad. And usually marketing, you want to narrow it and you want to get hyper local and hyper personal and all of that. But no, like engagement, you do. You want to keep it a bit broad because you want to be able to move with that community and be very flexible.
Yeah. I mean, without trying to pitch myself too much, I mean, um, we like I come from studio side, right? I've been studio for a long time before obviously starting this, and so I wanted to build a model that was really in line with what I was looking for when I was leading marketing departments. I wanted someone who would always be on, and we could have retained so that we could spool up certain things, but then also knew that we had this smaller retainer. So for working with someone like us, we're essentially like a team for hire. Like think about us as more like your fractional marketing team, right? So we do have the community managers, the social media managers, the art teams, the UA leads, all that kind of stuff. Um, but we cost ourselves in a way that is going to be, more affordable for like a smaller studio's budget, right? So that it does actually make financial sense. And so, and there is obviously a lot of other studios that kind of do similar things, and there's a ton of really great contractors out there as well too that do similar things as well too. But it's you don't need a full-time team working 40 hours a week, when you have one smaller game. You need a team that can spool up a lot of resources when the time is appropriate, when you have those key beats, but then look at the strategic pipeline and look at those engagement touch points and see, all right, here's an opportunity. This worked, this didn't work, this message is resonating, this isn't. And sometimes it's just having those other strategic eyes on your work outside of just having one person or one community manager who's doing a great job at what they're doing helps you see things that you might not recognize, right? That might be able to find patterns within the analytics that say this is where we should probably start to explore something different. Which when you're a marketer of one or marketing team of one, because I've been there, I know a lot of other people listening have been there. It's almost impossible to do that, right? And then fighting internal battles to try to get the budgets to find people full time to help you with that.
Yeah, because well,
Sometimes it's a lot of work.
I was gonna say it's almost like sometimes, feeling like you're on an island or something alone. You want a fresh perspective. Well, from whom? And sometimes, as you said, it's just as simple as that. And seeing the potential in what you have, which is something you do a lot, and you're talking a lot about, which is yes, we have an older game. You often overlook the potential of what do you have in that. You have IP. You have a community with that game. Um,
Mhm.
how do you work with them? Where should they start? Do you just say, look, I'm looking at this and here's something you didn't consider?
It's a conversation we have a lot actually with a lot of our studio partners. They, coming to us and say like, we're working on this new project, but we have this old one that we want to get started. We want to reinvigorate for various reasons, right? And people say like, exactly what you said, where do we even begin? And
Yeah.
it's just start by looking at the community around that project, right? A lot of times we hear for some reason people are still engaging with this game. We don't know why. We moved on, but the community hasn't. Like, and so step one is just go figure out why. You know, get in there, spend time looking at communities, looking at comments, looking at posts, looking at reviews. Get involved with the community from the perspective of your player, right? And understand what it is they care about. And if there's an opportunity, then yeah, I mean, sometimes it can be as simple as just restarting the post, right? On Facebook, right? Because maybe the game is 6 years old and Facebook was still relevant to that audience, right? Or maybe it's a couple years old and it's something on TikTok or like a COVID hit or something like that, right? So
Yeah.
it could be on a very, very different channel. But then as time goes by, people go back outside. Those COVID hits don't really necessarily stand the test of time for various reasons. But there's still this core player base that's engaged, that's paying. Service them,
Mhm.
right? Talk to them,
Okay.
and just start the conversation.
Hmm.
And you'd be surprised at kind of like what can happen.
Well, that's just the point. We were chatting about a few of these examples, and you told me about one where it's just like, listening and listening to the community. And wow, it boosts revenue. It does work. Maybe you can walk me through one of those examples of like what happened, what made it work, because double digit growth, that's awesome. And to get it from something that was there underneath your nose all the time is like off
Yeah.
the charts. That's fantastic.
The particular project you're speaking on, I mean, I can speak to a few numbers, but I can't speak to everything just because of various NDA purposes. But this specific project you're referring to that we talked about saw about a 30% growth in revenue from day one to day 365, which was when we actually started to like look at that, it was fairly impressive, and we were actually like very very happy with this. Um, Honestly, the first quarter that we worked on the project, it was just social, right? Nobody had been posting on this channel. They had maybe been posting once a month, nothing too crazy. And so we just went in and looked at the community, looked what they cared about. It was based on an IP, so we had the ability to lean into a little bit more than just the game. Um, and so that gave us a bit of an in when it came to what we could say, right? Which is a great jumping off point. As that kind of grew, we started layering in ASO. We started layering in some various campaign beats. We started layering in a little bit more work with the dev team as we started to see the charts work right in our favor. And as we started to do that, we're like, okay, well now we have this opportunity to work with the dev team because you can see that there's meaningful impact happening, and we can start to say, well, we should consider this when it comes to various, let's say, IAP packages or sale dates or limited time events or anything like that. And we were able to convince them to start reinvesting in the game because we were starting to see the product
Yeah.
grow. And as that progressed, it got to the point now where they've built up a bit of a buffer for this particular project where we can now start reinvesting in UA and doing UA for the project based entirely on just like this lift that we've seen in year one. And from that, we're now on track to double the overall value of the game for year two.
Wow.
So which is like from a game that was sitting on the shelf to now doubling its value. And seeing really strong organic download rates. We're pretty happy with the way, obviously, that's going. But honestly, it just starts with, like you said, being brave and looking at your community and saying, like, there's still something here. Like, what is
Yeah.
what is potentially going on? So,
They're there, and maybe you just have to come back. As you said, it was just present, being there, communicating,
mhm.
and ultimately, hey, converting. Another one you told me that just sticks with me because I'm just trying to even just try to imagine what this was like, to hit into a community that's so diehard. You really have to lean into the community because you're finding out, you said yourself, find out why they're there, and you can find out some amazing things, like they are living in almost a parallel universe, because you were talking about the one game you revived, Adventure Communist, where the community's so into it, they're actually speaking are using fake Russian accents to converse. That must tell you something, right? You got it.
Yeah, so this is a couple studios ago. This one I'm not under NDA for, so I can talk about this one.
This is a wild
Um,
one, by the way, because this is like
yeah,
my favorite so far.
Yeah, so when I started at Hyper Hippo, I mean, I will say we didn't revive this game. It was already live. It was just,
Mhm.
secondary to Adventure Capitalist, which is their big legacy game.
Mhm.
And so when I first came in, we looked at this little funny little game that they had released, and the community was, yeah, like you said, always kind of speaking to us in this like fake Russian accent, and at the time, the team was the traditional CS was just like, thanks for your comments, we're going to log your bugs, blah blah blah, and not and I'm not speaking ill of them. They did a really good job, and we had a lot of volume and for a small team, and they did excellent.
Mhm.
But we started to like say, well, what if we just make a little bit of a tweak with the way that we're talking to them? What if we speak back to them in the same language? From the perspective of the glorious leader, right, which is the character within the game. And what we started to realize, going beyond just the fake accent cosplay, was the unit of I guess whatever you would call it, like mining or the currency in the game. The base thing was always a potato,
Mhm.
right? Your character would go and mine potatoes, and then you'd trade potatoes for science and blah, 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 and so on and so on.
Mhm.
Um, but for some reason, the potato turned into this like icon, like all hail glorious potato, and it kind of overtook the glorious leader. And so we were able to lean into this like rallying cry of we work together for the common good of growing potatoes, essentially.
Okay.
And then we started to say, well, what can we do beyond that, right? What can we do beyond that? And so we started to say, okay, well, let's play off the ideology of our portfolio of capitalism and communism. Well, let's start having the communists try to like hack the capitalist mainframe. And so we started doing these like cross attacks between the communities to try to infiltrate the other communities and kind of gamify what we were doing there. And first of all, it was a lot of fun. We had a lot of opportunity, and this was during COVID, so obviously everyone's very engaged with games, and so that really started to help it take off. But I mean, I think the big thing here was like, the big takeaway is like, don't look at your players as a collection of player IDs, right? They're real people who play your game for a reason, and understanding like why they're there. I mean, especially for these games, because they're little idle clicker games, right? There's not a lot to engage with. There's not a lot of action. There's status bars that move, and you just tap, and they've got a couple characters. But these communities were very engaged for what they were, and so it's just remembering that these are people, not a string of numbers in your code.
What a great story. I mean, it's something that simple, which brings a whole different life to the game or to the community. I mean, then you start to really feel part of it as well, because you're watching how your audience talks and you're finding those opportunities. I'd like to deep dive a little bit more in that because, if those insights come from paying attention to the audience, how they speak. Is there a process? Is there just something that tells you what those hidden opportunities are? Or are you just like great for finding these, Mike? This might be your talent.
I I will yes to everything.
Great talent. Our
Yeah, no, but
glorious
it,
leader here, Mike.
yeah, right. But no, but I mean, there is a lot of tools that you can use to help this, but they're quite expensive.
Yeah.
And their subscription rates are quite high. I mean, even if you look at like your base level social platforms that do some light social listening, like Sprout or Hootsuite or whatever you might be using, I mean, they're still a couple $1,000s a year, right? And so for some smaller studios, that can
Resources
be,
for it, Mike. I don't want to interrupt, but I mean, you're dealing with small teams. So even
yeah.
if they could pull the money together, I think it's more of a manpower talent thing, but as you were saying.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so like the meltwaters of the world are just inaccessible for these smaller teams, and sometimes they require like a coder to go in and just build the search terms and search strings you actually need to use the tools properly. So yes, there's tools, but I think in this, if I had to give a tip, the simplest thing you can possibly do,
Mhm.
set a calendar invite in your calendar for first thing in the morning, and just get a cup of coffee and spend an hour going through your channels, engaging with people. If you want to kind of take it to that next level, set a spreadsheet up, right? And I mean, this sounds really basic, but it's
Yeah.
you know it's probably the simplest thing you can do is set a spreadsheet up, start to tick off, volume of what people are talking about, right? So if everyone's always talking about bugs, then log the bugs, right? What is the key bugs you're seeing on a regular basis, and you'll start to understand the buckets of stuff that's coming through, right?
Right.
Crashes, whatever. But then start looking at like, well, what are other people talking about beyond that? If you have an IP, is there a character people are talking about the most? Is there are they talking about events that you have going on in the game? Are they constantly wondering what's next, what's coming next, or are they like engaging with each other? And what is the response rate to them engaging back with you, right?
Hmm.
And start to build out just this list and volume, and you can just do some very basic graphing and chart what it is where your efforts should be spent, right? You can start to understand what people are saying and what key messages are resonating, and test it over time and see how things are going, right? Like that is the most basic thing you can possibly do, and it doesn't take that long. You just need to put the time aside to
Yeah.
do it, right? um, and you would be surprised with just like that little amount of extra effort, what you'll uncover about your players. And, it could even be you uncover what you should be doing next for your updates. What events are resonating the best? Which events have the best balance that feels the best for players? Not always what you think as a developer is the best balance, right? Sometimes players want things a little bit different. So you know what I mean? So it's like, yes, there's a lot of tools, but there's also a very basic way to do this from someone who's never done this before.
And it's understanding, it's listening. I mean, it makes sense. Set a calendar reminder and just do it, and do it consistently. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do it consistently.
Every day, every day. And like the thing that I like about doing it in the morning, um, it gives you time to let your full 24-hour clock go, right? So,
Mhm.
we're in the Pacific time zone. So, we get European time zones later, right?
Right.
You know what I mean? You guys are engaging while we're sleeping. And so we come in and we can see, especially if that's a big part of your player base, make sure that you have a volume of that player base that you can then go and like analyze, as opposed to having to do it on a trickle, right? So yeah, it's also like there's a bit more obviously to it, but like understand where your players are and where you're coming from, and then set your timing up accordingly. But I personally like first thing in the morning.
I knew it was going to be a great show with you, Mike, because you're just going to be straightforward, and there are, there problems don't. Let's put it this way: big problems don't always very need the complicated answers
Yeah,
you're trying to say. And I love the fact that you're just being real. So I want to go back to the other point, which was one that I thought was like, it's going to be your trademark, because you are really turning this into a science, what to do with an old game, what to do with a community, how to revive them, how to reignite them. First of all, I applaud that. And secondly, I'd like to understand a little bit more about, that challenge, the questions you need to ask yourself. I mean, for example, for a studio listening in, what is the pitfall that they need to avoid before they even get started in this?
yeah, that's a really good question. I honestly think the biggest one and the biggest barrier we always run up against is studios getting paralyzed by starting and worrying about immediate ROI.
Mm,
It's not going to happen. It might, like I'm not going to say it's not going to happen. It might, right? And if it is, then like I was saying earlier, you should be doubling down, right? Because you've hit on something, and you should definitely be looking at why, and trying to figure that out.
mhm.
Uh, it's going to take time, right? Especially with a stagnant community. The first couple months, people are good. Well, I'll start at the beginning. The first month, your first post when you go out, when people are like, they're gonna be like, oh my God, they're back. Like, this is so exciting. We haven't heard from you guys forever. There's going to be an excitement bump.
Yeah.
And then it's going to dovetail, right? Because you're going to get a lot of people that said, oh, right, I actually don't care about this anymore. And so you're going to kind of call the herd a little bit, and then it's going to start rising, right? But it's going to take a few months. And a lot of people say, like, well, we can do like a couple months to figure this out. And like, you need to at least invest 3 months in this, right? Because you need to do the strategic work, then you need to build content and your strategies, and then you need to execute, see what's working, and then let that herd call sort itself out before you're going to start to see things grow, right? That's the biggest thing, and people get very hung up on what the ROI is. So that's the first thing. The other thing to consider, or that people constantly come back is, and this is something I don't remember if I told you this, Peggy, but like when we look at our competitive set as like a company, we view our competitors, or our biggest competitor, as in-house hires, right? Because that is constantly what we hear from people is like, well, we're debating, should we hire somebody or should we hire an agency? Maybe we hire you for a bit and then we go and we hire, or our goal is always going to be have an in-house team.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, we understand that. But then you're starting to get into that analysis paralysis again. Well, do we do this? Do we do that? And again, it always comes back to like, well, what is the ROI? Hiring people is going to be a lot more expensive. So it's always coming back to this metric that you can't really understand until you have a chance to just dive in and try. And that's probably the biggest pitfall, is people get paralyzed by that choice and then they don't try.
Hmm. I hear of that a lot, incidentally, oh, we'll have someone in-house, and then they are like, yeah, but we don't have a lot of work for that person in-house. And they sort of like put them in as
Yeah,
like, talent for hire, and stick them in places where it's not really working out either. Yeah. So I get that. It is an investment and it's a mindset shift as well. So let's say they get over the paralysis, right? And they're like, yes, we have to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to be patient, which is half the battle, but you still need to know what to measure and what do the numbers look like? So what's a sign that you're on the right track?
That's tough because every community behaves differently. So you know what I mean, and especially if you have like a multiplayer game versus like a single player game, are you reinvigorating conversation with people, or are people talking to you, right? Conversation says a lot, and you really have to understand the product, right? But if I have to like baseline this, I would say the first few months you're looking at engagement growth or engagement start, right? So what does that bump look like? And then what does the baseline look like as it starts to come back up? That would be the first thing. You'll probably see that for the first couple months. After that, you'll start to see growth, right? The audience will begin to grow as you're starting to become a bit of a magnet again in the algorithm, and people start to come back in. Your K factor will start to grow. People will say, "Oh yeah, I remember that game. I'm going to go check it out," right? And so that's what you're looking for. That's where you start to see ROI, essentially, right? Because you're doing the organic thing. You're becoming a magnet for people to either come back or rediscover you, or it's discover you for the first time. Then you'll start to see your organics, like downloads, actually start to grow, right?
Yeah.
That's what you'll start to see, is you'll start to see this bump. It's not going to be huge, and I will caution, because a lot of people say, well, how do you gauge organic downloads? It's tough. You have to be willing to kind of play in the gray because of second screen issues, right? So especially if you're doing, for example, let's say a lot of YouTube content and people are exploring your content long form on their browser, but you have a mobile game or anything, like even you're doing anything on your computer or desktop first and you're coming to your phone, there's going to be a break and a split in your analytics, right? And so you have to be willing to look at what is your trend over time and your growth over time, and what is the metric that it's actually growing. It could be revenues, right? It might not be organic growth. It could be revenues. It could be IAPs. The other thing it could be is retention,
Yeah.
right? And this is another thing that we see really get affected by this is retention growth. And it's kind of like the later stage metric in that longer term, let's say 1 year pipeline, is players are sticking around longer, right? Because they care. The people who are there and engaging are the players that care. They want to play longer. They want to engage longer. They want to buy your loot boxes or whatever it is you're selling, and so you'll start to see these core metrics grow, and but it'll present itself in your dashboards as organic growth. And so you have to be willing to play in the gray and correlate data that you might not necessarily directly say, yes, this is a social initiative that made a social bump.
It's that measurement, it's that bump, it's a little bit of incrementality as well. That's the one we will always be grappling with. Talk so much about community, and you've said in some of your presentations as well, don't chase virality, go for marginal gains. What does this look like in practice? Marginal gains, that's another sort of vague term. I know you can't define it, but maybe what does a longer term bet look like, and why is marginal gains that?
I'm going to talk about virality first, because this is what I'm passionate about. Because I have, again, people always ask, well, like how can we go viral with this content? If we're making a bunch of YouTube content, how can we make something go viral? Well, you
Yeah.
can't. You kind of can, but like you have to juice it, and you have to have a lot of luck, right? And if you do go viral, and this is what I always say to folks as well too, is like, are you going viral with the right audience? Because if you're not, who cares,
True.
right? If you're a core first person shooter game, and you go viral for some reason with a bunch of, like, I don't know, 50-year-old mobs
Dang
for
it.
some reason,
Yeah.
right? You know what I mean? Like, it's the wrong audience. I mean, unless they've
Can't
got
please
unless they've got a bunch of 14-year-old kids, then sure,
them.
right? But like, it's if you
Yeah.
go viral with the wrong audience and you say that's what we need to do more of that, you're spending a lot of good time on bad, right? And so that's why we always try to steer people more towards, like, how can we actually make what your audience cares about more interesting, right? And it kind of comes down to that like 80-20 rule. 80% of stuff we're going to create is always going to be about the game and the IP and what people are going to, what we know is going to work, which I'll get to marginal gains in a second. And then that other 20% is going to be like, let's try something crazy,
Okay.
right? Let's do something fun. Let's take a take a shot in the dark and see what happens. But when we talk about marginal gains, right? Like I think the big thing is I'll use I'll use a couple examples. One, the game that I was talking about earlier with the year one growth of 30%. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that 30% in revenue was not there before, right? That's growth that they didn't have before that they could now reinvest and build a marketing budget out of that now, is turning into potentially doubling their audience, right? It's looking at like, okay, well, if you've got a smaller game, let's say you're making 5 grand a day off this product, right? So what is that, like 35K a month
Mm-hmm.
on average, let's say, I don't know, give or take. Um, no, is that math?
Yeah.
Sure. We'll call that math,
Okay.
right? But if that 35% turns into or 35K turns into 40K, right? All of a sudden now you've got an extra 60K at the end of the year, right? So it's not looking for like we need to make millions of dollars this month by spending everything now and then turning off the faucet and it drops, right? I mean that's great, but like how are you? We're in this business to stay alive for a long time. So how are we building sustainable audiences? And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I met with when we were at GDC, I met with a company, I won't name them, big AAA company, and we were talking about some of the case studies, and I had this moment of realization. It was like, okay, well, let's say we make a game $1 million for this company. It's a rounding error on their quarterly earnings report. But for a small studio, that's keeping their lights on for a couple of years. That's everyone's salaries paid and bonuses, blah, blah, blah. It These little incremental gains or these marginal gains make a huge difference. And sometimes like was I mean, the whole theme of this, right, is sometimes just turning on a faucet of something that you haven't done for a while. And just engaging with your players and doing little things that are going to make these gains happen and this impact happen, and your funnel grows wider, like we were saying, by increasing these engagements, which then grows your revenues and grows your bottom line. So that's how we like to try to look at things, and that's why we kind of like to take a bit of a longer term view as at the projects that we work with.
Well, see, that's what it's about, though. It's about the small things that have big impact because this is that time. I mean, look at where we are in the world and look at what has
Yeah,
happened. I don't even look anymore the articles about the layoffs, and there was this
yeah,
tracker that you could watch and see the numbers. I mean, it's not a time where you can say, nope, I'm not going to look at that potential because I've got enough of it. So I want to stay there for our audience. Small to mid-sized companies, it's all about do more with less. So let's do through a couple of like rapid scenarios here. Let's say
sure.
we have a studio, limited resources. You said before 20K marketing budget. Okay, we'll stay with 20K marketing budget. That's what they have. One smart move they can make right now after listening to us here on the podcast to see traction.
Oh man. Um, for everyone listening to this, Peggy sent me this question a couple days ago to mull over, and I still have a hard time answering it because it's so dependent, right?
Yeah,
It depends on your goals and where you are in your product
yeah,
cycle, right?
yeah.
I'm gonna,
Genre of game. I mean, hell, if it's a certain genre, it's going to make it. And
yeah,
you know,
yeah. I would say if you're a mobile game, right, and this is your all you've got to start with, I would start by really, really understanding your retention and your monetization curves early on so
okay.
that if you are going to, like, let's say you spend 10K on that and you're like, all right, we got 10K after this to actually do something with, what that 10K will turn into, and you can start to do some forecasts.
Hmm.
Um, I'm not a UA guy. I got smarter people that can that do that than I am. So than I do. So this is not my area of expertise, but that would be probably my recommendation is really understand if you can scale this product or not.
Hmm.
Um, if you've already done that and you're like, all right, we know this product's going to work, we're good to go. I would still say UA, because there is still a place for it, right, in the marketing stack for mobile games.
Yeah.
Depending on the product, I might look at influencers, right? I might look at something, you know, spend a little bit on influencers, and again, invest in community, right? Invest in figuring out how to bring people into your community, so that you can have a constant opportunity to talk to them, right? Because the other thing too is like once they've followed you, it's not like you're paying per impression, right? If you've got them in your Discord or on your Instagram or your TikTok or whatever, you now have the right to constantly talk to them, and give them messages. Whereas if you're only doing UA, you're constantly paying for frequency and impressions and trying to hammer them with messages to get them to convert, right? Which they might not. But if you kind of blend it all together, understand what's possible, you can turn a very small budget into something usable and reusable fairly quickly.
Because
And then for Steam, it's a whole different thing. Make sure your Steam store is like, dialed, and then start to do some, some actual like marketing pushes, and look at Reddit and all that kind of stuff. But that's a whole other conversation. So that's a long-winded answer of saying like there's a lot of things you can do, but really understanding your product. One other thing I would talk to, or I would point out, that's not budget dependent, is make sure your product has community in mind or marketability in mind in the design phase. And I know that's not something we've touched on quite yet, but um,
yeah,
I getting the marketer, whoever it might be, in the room to say like, you need to have these touch points, or you need to be able to do this with this product, otherwise it's not going to work,
hmm
is so important. And do it before it's too late.
hmm. You know, that's an idea for another show with you, Mike. Exactly that. What are the must-have engagement touch points? I'm not kidding you. My mind's like going, thinking, this is pretty cool. Because you have a very, very systematic approach to this. And one part of the systematic approach is, an engagement audit. We talk about engagement with the community, look at your engagement metrics, have an engagement audit. What does that look like for a legacy game?
Yeah, scrolling through months and months and months of posts and community engagements, and get a sense of the why, at the end of the day, it's why. Why do they care? Understand why, because if you're going to come back and start talking to them and you're just going to push limited time event sales messages down their throats, you're just going to scare them off, right? That's not what they're there for. They don't care. They've been there forever. They know that there's purchases to be had in the game. They know the packs. They know the product, right?
Mm-hmm.
Speak to their why, and understand their why.
Okay.
Um, and then at the same time, like, that's from our perspective. But then going back to the studio, ask what the studio wants from the community,
Mm-hmm.
which is a question that doesn't always get asked, right? What is it they actually want? Do they want ideas as to how to grow this product? Do they want to be able to are they making a sequel to this product? They want to be able to cross promote other products within their portfolio to this audience, or are they trying to keep the lights on? And is this going to be, are they hedging all their bets on this new product, and they need something that's going to keep the lights on, keep the community happy while they take this other bigger bet, right? You need to understand these various problems, and figure out a strategic way to answer the why for both those audiences, because you have two audiences essentially.
That makes sense. And I mean, I thought at the beginning, oh no, scrolling through, but yes, it is work. It doesn't sound very, yeah, it sounds like just hard work, but it has returns. And a good point that you made. You also have to tell them what you want, because I was talking here on the show, and it was, forget the game now, but I do remember the lesson. And it was like, you know, they have a mission. They have something that, if you tell them what you want, they're like, yeah, 100% behind it. So yeah, it is that communication. It goes in both directions. I guess that's something maybe you have to talk more with, with the companies you're working with. Is this something that you have to impress upon them, or is this just like natural? I just wonder to what extent you have to reskill studios and community managers to ask the why question of themselves as well.
Yeah, I mean, we do, we do a little bit, but I, I I think because one thing we've been seeing is obviously since UA has become so difficult and expensive and the COVID heydays are over, um, people see the value in community. They're seeing it, right? They're seeing it because there needs to be something else that studios can do to grow their audiences
Mhm.
if they don't, or if they can't afford $3 per download or whatever your CPI is, right?
Right.
Especially if it's a lower LTV style game, right? So it's people aren't naive to it. They just don't like, going back to what we were saying earlier, they just need to see the ROI, and that's that gray area. And so that's always why we have to say like, well, why do you want to reinvigorate this community? Why not something else? Why not focus on this? Blah blah blah. And it does make them pause because it does make them, under like really kind of think about why they're doing this. Yeah, so that, I mean, that's an interesting question. It's again, it's just, the knowledge growth within studios has shifted, especially around community. I mean, I'll be honest, I started out in community and as like a community manager, and when I was first starting, it was very much looked at as an entry level job, or you graduated to it from CS or something like that, right?
Right.
It was very much a junior position. Now, I mean, think about what you're asking these people to do, and especially if they're juniors, you're asking them to run the entire communication platform of your studio and of your product to millions of people. That's not a junior position, right? Like there's a lot of responsibility that goes into that and making sure everything is airtight and not just like, hey, we're putting out one message. Sometimes you're doing that every single day. You're posting multiple times a day. Like that is a lot of content communication you're having with millions of people. That's not a junior position. And so looking at the why really helps people think about all of those things together and come back with a real like strategy of this is what we're trying to do.
Yeah, because you have to have some focus. It's not just posting for the heck of it. I mean, that's what it was maybe earlier on with many community managers. It's just like, yeah, it's like, it's being there, being present. It's like volume. No, it's not volume. It's also value. So we talked about the why. It's important. It's like a North Star in a way. But there are other why questions that I want to explore before I let you go, Mike. So why test? What is one small change that a studio can test that might make a difference, a big difference?
Yeah, look at a community as an investment that can reap rewards, right? We worked on a game that launched, I won't name the game again, with a 2.1 star rating out of 5, right? It was
Okay.
not received super well.
Yeah.
A lot of people within the community were not happy with the product that came out. It was a sequel to another big IP that was very, very popular. Um, we this is where a company that really understands what they're trying to do and working with like like a team like ours can really make a really cool meaningful impact in a short amount of time. So their dev team really wanted to understand why the community hated this product in its current
Okay.
state, and so we responded and logged, like we were saying earlier about like logging into that spreadsheet of to help you kind of figure out what people care about.
Mhm.
We logged every single response
Okay.
or comment and every platform that this game went live on. It wasn't a mobile game, so it was multi-platform.
Mhm.
Um, we logged every single comment. We logged the date that it was delivered and a link to the comment so that we could revisit later, right? And then we logged the core problem, and then we highlighted that core problem, right? So then
Okay.
we could very easily see on a pie chart what people were saying and what the issues were, right?
Right.
Um, we funneled that information back up to the developers, and they said, yeah, okay, we're actually going to go through and fix all of these problems based on volume of people with the sole intention of trying to make the product better for the masses, right?
Right.
Once those updates started to come through and once the patches started to come through, we would then go through, look at every player that made a comment about that particular issue and go back and talk to every single one of them across all the stores and touch points with a custom message that just said, hey, you talked about this being an issue. We just released patch whatever, whatever. Um, you know, it's fixed. We would love it if you could change your star rating after you've tried it and see if like your experience is better. And we did that for everybody across the entire platform or all the platforms that the game was live on. The star rating went from 2.1 up to 4.2.
Whoa.
A majority of that was just from asking people to change their star rating, but given the effort of going through and saying like, hey, the developers heard you. You know, everyone always says like, hey, we hear you, we're gonna fix it, and then it all goes on deaf ears.
Yeah, crickets. Yeah.
We actually went back in and like made sure that people knew that their issue was resolved, and we saw a lot of people say, "Oh my God, thank you so much for actually responding and following up on this," and blah 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 blah. You know, and yeah, going from a 2.1 to a 4.2 is a huge shift, right? And then obviously, as you become into the more favorable category of star ratings, like more players sort of come in, it becomes like we were saying before, it becomes more of a magnet. You know, how do you bring people in? And that was we started to see that organic growth really start to take off as those star ratings started to grow. And a majority of it, like I said, was straight up just from asking people to change their reviews and talking to people like humans.
It's a great story, and that's it. Talking like they matter. You care. You've done something, and they can be very forgiving. You know, it happens that you say, "Look, you know, we're on it. We're fixing it." You know, and it just shows that, yeah, exactly what it is. It's a dialogue and treating people like humans, just the way we started when you said players are not IDs, right? It's not player IDs. It's people.
Yep.
This is a great talk because I can see why you're giving it so often at different events. And looking forward to seeing you again, Mike, actually, and not just like two ships in the night because you're
Yeah.
buzzing off somewhere and I'm buzzing off, but to have a proper sit down with you.
Yeah.
And yeah, and more of this because you know, they're practical, they're doable, they're actionable. And we always bring it back to games. We've been talking about games, but bring it back to your personal choice because we always ask our guests here two questions. What's your favorite game you're playing right now? And what's your favorite game of all time?
Ooh.
Ooh,
Okay, well, my favorite game of all time is easy. That would be StarCraft, the original, not StarCraft 2 or Brood War, the original.
okay. Good
And the
choice.
why would be because uh, growing up in, I don't remember how old I was. I feel like I was like 10 or 12 or something. I don't know. Early, I was young. I was there. Maybe I was even younger. I don't know. But it was like a rallying cry for our friends. You know, after school, we'd all run home, jump on the computer, log on to BattleNet, and duke it out, right?
Yeah,
Not so dissimilar from what people are doing right now with Roblox, but
yeah.
a little bit different with the IP. And it just kind of like stuck with me. So I always have a soft spot for that game. What I'm playing now, I just finished the new Dragon Age, and I just
Oh,
started
okay.
the new Berserker. Was it like the last Berserker or the first Berserker? I can't actually remember the name of what it's called, but it's a Souls-like game, and I'm enjoying it. I'm not a good Souls-like player. I don't have enough time to get good at these games, but I really want to. So I'm trying to muscle my way through on this one. So next time we see each other, I'll let you know if I like it still or not.
You are on. It's a date, Mike. I have to say, a delight. Some things are worth waiting for. I have to say, we have been doing this, I think it was since summer, it feels like.
Yeah,
And here we are, fast, almost back there again. Well worth it. So glad you could take the time, Mike. And I look forward to connecting with you in real life again. And I'll take you up on that. Thanks
sounds
again.
good. Thank you so much, Peggy. I appreciate it.
This show is all about how to do your job better, how to make an amazing game, how to market it, and you have a say. So if you have a story or know someone we need to shine a light on, then we would love to hear from you.
We want to hear from you. We want to reflect the reality of the mobile games market in all its wonderful complexity and strangeness. So if you have any suggestions for us, if you have any feedback for us, you can always get in touch. You can email us at podcast@pocketgamer.biz. You can find us on Twitter @PGBiz, and you can reach out to us through the pocketgamer.biz website. If you're interested in listening to all of our podcasts, you can find them at pocketgamer.biz/podcast, and we would love to hear your thoughts on future shows.
And we've got you covered on all the major platforms, so subscribe to the audio podcast, as Brian said. Look for us on YouTube. If you want to read it, hey, you can do that too, because we have a companion post for you as well on the pocketgamer.biz website.
Tune in again for the next edition of the pocketgamer.biz podcast, and we look forward to speaking to you in the near future. Until then, I'm Brian Baglow.
I'm Peggy Anne Salz, and that's a wrap until next week.